So today we have several things that I want to talk about. I know you had was it a TV show, a documentary that you wanted to talk about, and our topic is going to be how our parents influenced the way we parent. Each of us come from very different experiences of being parented, and I think in a way we've all come to the same sort of conclusion. But I want to talk about how we got there because I think that could help folks. Do you want to go ahead and talk about that documentary?
Sure, yeah. We've kind of started a thing where at the top of the show, someone brings up kind of a newsy item. And this time I wanted to talk about the HBO documentary, which is called Leaving Neverland. And it's been big in the news. You may have heard of it. It features two men who had been victimized by Michael Jackson over a period of many years. One man's abuse started when he was 7 and then continued till he was 14, and the other very similar age range. What was so important about this documentary, and what made it hard to watch, and it probably would be quite triggering to survivors of child sexual abuse, but it did an excellent job of, it was 4 hours long. It's done in two 2-hour parts. And the reason for that is they really take a lot of time to actually have you follow, from the very beginning of the grooming process.
Wow.
And how intricate that web was that Jackson spun. And then, to where the abuse actually started. And then what transpired when these boys started to get to be teenagers and still thought they were in love with him. The manipulation was so intense. And then how they dealt with it later. And I won't give more of it away than that. So I think that it had a lot of valuable information to really help people understand why children get ensnared in these kinds of relationships, why it's so difficult, or why they may just absolutely refuse to tell anyone, mostly because the perpetrator turns that child away from the people that they fully trust and love. And also it just really resonated with what we've been seeing in the Catholic Church, because Michael Jackson was very godly to a lot of people.
Yeah,
and so what was also fascinating was how parents who have sent their children off with father so-and-so or sister so-and-so, and then learned years later that their children had been abused over many years, and were shocked that that could happen. It got into the whole mindset of the parents as well, and didn't let them off the hook as being partly perpetrators. So I felt it was very informative, even though, my research would have to do more with perpetrators who were religious authorities. All of those psychological fear tools and manipulation and all of that is the same. So the power imbalance, etc. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to it. And if you've got HBO, or you can get on someone's account, it's really worth watching.
Sounds fascinating and horrifying. Right. I'm kind of astonished at the fans who will justify or deny his behavior.
And that's another thing. There are people who will, fingernails in the dirt, refuse to acknowledge that that the Catholic Church even has any problems, that there are any systemic problems. It's a few bad apples, is usually it. But really that comes into play whenever a perpetrator is is a powerful person in a religious community or a different kind of community. So yeah, that I've studied so many criminal cases where, I mean, someone has been charged with the most horrendous crimes, and yet the whole faith community will show up in the courtroom on behalf of the perpetrator. Whereas the victim, no one shows up for the victim.
Right.
Yeah, it got that across as well. So.
Wow, and it is a worship of sorts. The way fans feel about people like Michael Jackson and I remember when my daughter was in 3rd grade, her teacher was a worshiper of Michael Jackson, and she wanted them to get online and do a research project about Michael Jackson, and I was like, say what? You're going to have, is that a can of worms or what? Wow. Yeah, I was a little not cool with that. So, any thoughts, Dale?
No, I think Jan said it really well.
Okay, all right. We have a caller already, gang, and this is Reinhard.
No, we don't.
Oh, no, we don't. I am sorry. This is somebody. Mark's like, no, don't talk. Okay. It shows up on my screen, and I hadn't read it yet. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean to panic the control room. Or Jan, because I did that last week or 2 weeks ago.
We're going to be vetting people, don't we?
Right. Yeah. I need I guess it goes, never mind. We're good. So I had one little thing that I talked about on the last show, and Jan, you happened to be on there, but I want to talk about it again, just in case people hadn't seen that show. And that's the book series of Skippy John Jones. If you're not familiar with it, they're very fun. Kids love them. The kids want to read them over and over again. But it's by Judy Schachner. I'm going to probably butcher her name. I'm sorry. It's about a Siamese cat who has a mother and sisters, and he feels that he is not like them. So he says, and he likes to think he's a Spanish Chihuahua. So that's why the Spanish fake accent. He says, "Holy smoquito," exclaimed Skippy John Jones. "I know you," he said to the doggy in the mirror. So he's looking at himself in the mirror, and he does not see a cat. He sees a dog. "Your ears are too big for your head. Your head is too big for your body. You are not a Siamese cat. You are still the big Chihuahua dude, the whole enchilada." And I'm reading it as she's written it. I'm not mocking an accent or anything. So I was looking through my books for another reason, my children's books, and I thought, in the time frame that I am now, I look at that and I think, that's body dysphoria. That is a perfect book to give a sense of what that means. If you're a parent and you have a child and they're questioning, here's your book. Or if you don't have that child that's questioning, later on, if you encounter such a person, a trans person, or someone who doesn't identify as male or female, they use the pronouns they, them, you can talk about this. Skippy John Jones, he didn't feel inside like what he looked like on the outside. Kind of a cool little accidental happy thing, I think. So there's that. We don't want to take that call, I'm remembering. And we were going to talk about what our parents did as parents for us and how what we did differed, or maybe was the same. I have lots I can say on this. Who wants to start? Dale, you want to start? I think you're probably, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Yeah, I grew up in what I've called a nominally Christian home. We went to church every Sunday because people went to church on Sunday, but nothing in particular was forced on us in terms of beliefs, or, it didn't so much invade the rest of the week is the way I look at it. And but Sunday school for, several years and the whole deal. But I think my parents ended up accidentally doing just a lot of the best possible things. And I think it was accidental in part because they were exhausted. They had You know, they were working 12 jobs, and they didn't really have time. If they had wanted to indoctrinate us, it would have taken a certain amount of energy to do that they didn't have. So they ended up kind of leaving us alone to think on our own. But then on top of that, they were very serious about the value of education and the value of science and inquiry and all those sorts of things. All those messages were pervasive in our home. And so it ended up being kind of the best possible combination. They inculcated those values, and then they left us alone to pursue questions, to think about things in the way that we wanted. We never had any religious indoctrination. But what we did have was a certain amount of low-level exposure so that we at least knew what it was. And it didn't develop into any kind of forbidden fruit for us. It was just this thing that we sort of had the information without the pressure, without the emotional stuff. And I just think it ended up being ideal, even if it was largely, you know, not an intentional thing on their part, but something that just worked out well.
Mm-hmm. And the way they taught you these things, was it in a loving, nurturing sort of way? I'm assuming it wasn't. Your parents, were they more authoritarian or authoritative, or?
No, it was more authoritative, but again, I don't think they would. You know, it wasn't any sort of an intentional parenting style, but I think it more. I mean, there was there was corporal punishment in the mix, but there was also, you know, a lot that's on the authoritative side. So it was just a kind of, I think, relatively typical upbringing for sort of, you know, growing up in the Midwest and, you know, all that sort of thing. But the funny thing that they did in retrospect is they made us feel that a lot of things were sort of things that everyone did, that not everyone did. Like, they gave us the idea that everyone went to college, for example. This was just something that somehow, I don't know exactly how they got that across, but we had the idea that, you know, everybody goes to college without even realizing that they hadn't gone to college, right? They gave us the idea that everybody played a musical instrument. And it wasn't a question of whether you play a musical instrument or not, it's which one you're going to play. And it was only years later that I said, hey, wait a minute, neither one of them played a musical instrument. So they had this way of getting messages across that make it just feel like, well, of course you're going to do this sort of thing. But fortunately, none of that, of course you're going to do it stuff, had to do with faith, had to do with religious belief. That was something that was incidental, and we had for sort of information purposes, and then we were allowed to sort of just run with our own thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And how did that inform the way you parented your children, or was that in your mind at all as you chose the way you parented?
Yeah, it really was, because I've come to, and I've since seen it reinforced in a lot of the best parenting literature, that you know, we often have a sense that we need to guide our children down a particular path as parents. And what we really have to do is what my, you know, parents sort of accidentally did, which is stay out of the way. We need to give them the support and the encouragement and the basic values, and then we need to not mess them up. You know, it's most of it is not a matter of doing a positive thing. It's about not doing the negatives, not being the obstacle. And if you do that and provide that support and give them experiences, you know, allow them to interact with peers, don't be overly protective. You know, there are just all these sorts of things that are different ways of saying, let them run. So I sort of became more intentional about that, I think, than my parents did. But I really learned it from my parents. I learned it from the fact that they were willing or had to sort of let us run out the back door and say, go, you know, go live life. I think I just sort of made that into an organizing principle of my parenting in a way that it may not have been so intentional. But I got it from mom and dad. So.
Okay, neato.